My husband asked for a divorce the day after I told him I was pregnant with twins. What he didn't know was that my grandmother's trust fund had an ironclad clause for this exact situation. The pregnancy test showed 2 clear lines, confirming what I had suspected for weeks. At 36, after years of trying and 2 miscarriages, I was finally pregnant. I planned the perfect evening to tell Daniel. His favorite meal, candles, the whole works. His reaction wasn't what I expected. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice flat as he stared at the positive test I'd wrapped in a tiny box. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. No excitement, no joy, just a strange, cold distance in his eyes I'd never seen before. I tried to mask my disappointment. "I know the timing isn't perfect with your new position at the firm, but we've wanted this for so long." I reached for his hand across our dining room table, but he pulled away, checking his watch. "I have some work to finish. We'll talk more tomorrow." He stood up, leaving his barely touched salmon on the plate. The front door closed behind him before I could say another word. I sat alone at our table for hours, the candles burning down to stubs, trying to understand what had just happened. Daniel and I had been married for 8 years. We'd spent 3 of those years actively trying for a baby. This should have been our moment of triumph, of celebration. Instead, it felt like something had broken between us. My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. A text from Daniel. "Staying at the office tonight. Don't wait up." The next morning, I woke to an empty bed again. The house was silent, that peculiar kind of silence that feels heavy, pregnant with unspoken words. I made myself tea, unable to stomach anything else, and waited. Around 9 a.m., I heard his key in the lock. Daniel walked in looking immaculate in a fresh suit. He must have kept clothes at the office. His face was composed, emotionless, as he set his briefcase on the counter and poured himself coffee without looking at me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice eerily calm. "This pregnancy, it's not what I want anymore." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. "What are you talking about? We've been trying for years. You were the one who suggested fertility treatments." "That was before." He straightened his tie, still not meeting my eyes. "Before the partnership opportunity, before the future I see for myself now. I can't do this. A baby, the suburbs, the minivan life. That's not who I am anymore." I stared at him, this stranger in my kitchen wearing my husband's face. "So what are you saying exactly?" He finally looked at me, his blue eyes, cold and determined. "I want a divorce, Olivia. I've already spoken to a lawyer." The world tilted beneath me. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "You've spoken to a lawyer? When?" "It doesn't matter." He pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "These are the initial papers. My lawyer will contact yours to work out the details." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "You're leaving me because I'm pregnant? After we spent years trying to have a baby?" "It's not just the pregnancy. We've been growing apart for years. You must have felt it too." His tone was practiced, rehearsed. "This is just the catalyst that made me finally admit what I've known for some time. We want different things now." "What different things?" "Last month you were talking about names for our future children." He had the decency to look away then. "People change, Olivia. I've changed." "What about our baby?" I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. "I'll provide financial support, of course. I'm not a monster." He checked his watch again, a new habit I was beginning to despise. "I have a meeting at 11. My lawyer's contact information is in the envelope. I'll be staying at the Madison Hotel until I find a place." And just like that, he was gone. Again. I slid to the floor, surrounded by shards of my broken mug, the envelope mocking me from the counter above. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when I was finally pregnant after years of heartbreak. I don't know how long I sat there, my mind replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I might have missed. Daniel and I had met at a charity gala where I was working, as an event coordinator. He was already a rising star at his law firm, charming everyone in the room. When he focused those charms on me, I never stood a chance. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend getaways to vineyard estates, front-row tickets to shows I could never have afforded on my salary. I fell hard, and fast for this man who seemed to have stepped out of a dream. When we married, I'd left my job at his suggestion. "My wife doesn't need to work," he'd said. "I want to take care of you." At the time, it felt romantic. Now I wondered if it had been the first step in making me dependent on him. My phone rang, jolting me back to the present. Dr. Winters, my obstetrician. "Olivia, congratulations again on your pregnancy. I've been looking over your blood work from yesterday, and there's something we should discuss." I braced myself for more. Bad news. Hadn't the universe taken enough from me today? "Your HCG levels are significantly higher than expected for this stage of pregnancy," she continued. "I'd like you to come in for an ultrasound as soon as possible. It could be nothing, but I want to make sure everything's progressing as it should." 3 hours later, I lay on an examination table, still numb from Daniel's announcement, as Dr. Winters moved the ultrasound wand over my stomach. "Ah, there we go," she said, her voice warm with excitement. "That explains the elevated hormones. Olivia, you're having twins!" Twins. The word echoed in my hollow chest. 2 babies. 2 heartbeats flickering on the screen. 2 lives depending on me now. I don't know what to say. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Tears of joy, of fear, of overwhelming uncertainty. "It's a lot to take in," Dr. Winters said gently, handing me a tissue. "Is Daniel here with you today?" The question pierced through me. "No," I managed. "He's busy." Dr. Winters nodded, not pressing further. "Well, let's print some photos for you to take home. You're about 8 weeks along, and everything looks healthy so far." I left the clinic in a daze, clutching the ultrasound. Photos in my hand. Twins. I was carrying twins, and my husband wanted a divorce. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. After years of trying to start our family, I was finally pregnant with not 1, but 2 babies. And Daniel was walking away. I sat in my car, unable to drive, unable to think straight. Who could I call? My parents had both passed away years ago. My sister lived across the country with her own family. Most of our friends were really Daniel's friends, colleagues from the firm and their spouses. People who would likely side with him when the news of our separation spread. There was really only one person I could think of. My grandmother's attorney, Margaret Blackwell. She had handled my inheritance when Grandma Eleanor died 5 years ago, a modest trust fund that Daniel had insisted we leave untouched, for emergencies. He'd never liked that the money was in my name alone, one of my grandmother's stipulations. "Never give a man complete control of your finances, Olivia," Grandma had told me shortly before she passed. "Even the good ones can change when money's involved." I'd dismissed her words as outdated thinking from a woman who'd lived through a different era. Now, I wondered if she'd somehow seen this coming. With trembling fingers, I dialed Margaret's number. "Olivia," she answered, her voice warm with recognition. "This is a pleasant surprise. How are you?" "Not well," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Daniel asked for a divorce this morning, right after I told him I'm pregnant." There was a moment of silence on the line. "I see," Margaret finally said, her tone shifting to something harder, more professional. "Are you somewhere safe? Can you come to my office?" "I'm in my car outside the doctor's office. I just found out I'm having twins." "Twins?" she repeated, and I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. "Olivia, I need you to come see me immediately. There's something about your grandmother's trust that we need to discuss." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The trust? What does that have to do with— Not over. The phone, she interrupted. "Can you drive? Or should I send a car for you?" I can drive." The strange urgency in her voice cut through my fog of shock. "Good. I'll clear my afternoon. Be here at 2. As I navigated the familiar streets toward downtown, my mind raced with questions. What did my grandmother's trust fund have to do with Daniel's sudden decision to leave me? The fund wasn't particularly large, enough to provide a comfortable safety net, but certainly not life-changing money. Daniel earned more than that in 2 years at his firm. I parked in the visitor's lot of the imposing glass building where Margaret's law firm occupied the top 3 floors. In the elevator, I caught my reflection. Pale face, red-rimmed eyes, hair hastily pulled back. I looked nothing like the polished, confident woman who had always stood proudly beside Daniel at firm events. That woman felt like a stranger now. Margaret was waiting for me when the receptionist showed me into her office, a corner suite with views of the city skyline. She took one look at me and immediately came around her massive desk. "Oh, Olivia," she said, guiding me to a comfortable chair and pressing a glass of water into my hand. "I am so sorry about Daniel, but I have to say I'm not entirely surprised." I stared at her. "What do you mean? Did you know this would happen?" "Not specifically," she said, returning to her chair. "But your grandmother had concerns. That's why she structured your trust the way she did." Margaret opened a folder on her desk, putting on her reading glasses. "Eleanor came to me about a month before she passed away. She wanted to make some very specific adjustments to your trust fund." I sipped the water, trying to focus through my exhaustion. "What kind of adjustments?" Margaret looked up at me, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "She added a marriage protection clause with a pregnancy contingency." "A what?" "In simple terms, if your spouse ever abandoned you during a pregnancy, the trust would immediately activate its secondary provisions." Margaret closed the folder. "Olivia, there's no delicate way to say this. Your grandmother suspected Daniel might leave you if things got difficult or if something more appealing came along." The water glass nearly slipped from my fingers. "That's ridiculous. Grandma loved Daniel. She told me how charming he was, how perfect for me." "She said those things to your face," Margaret corrected gently. "To me, she expressed different opinions. She saw something in him that concerned her, something beneath the charm and the perfect manners." I shook my head, unwilling to believe it. Even if she had doubts, how could she possibly have predicted this specific situation? That's impossible. Not predicted precisely, protected against. Margaret removed her glasses. Eleanor was a remarkable woman who understood people in ways that sometimes seemed uncanny. She'd seen similar situations play out with friends over the years. She wanted to make sure you were protected, just in case. Protected how? Margaret's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, perhaps, or vindication. "That's what we need to discuss," she said, leaning forward. "Because as of this morning, when Daniel asked for a divorce while you're carrying his children, your grandmother's contingency plan has officially activated, and Daniel has no idea what's coming." I left Margaret's office with my head spinning, clutching a folder full of documents I could barely comprehend. The early evening air felt thick, oppressive, as I made my way to my car. My phone had been buzzing incessantly for the past hour, all messages from Daniel. "Where are you? We need to discuss the logistics of separation. My lawyer needs to know who's representing you. Are you ignoring me?" I silenced the phone and slipped it back into my purse. Let him wonder. Let him worry. For once, Daniel could wait for me. The hotel where he was staying was only 15 minutes from Margaret's office. I hadn't planned to go there, hadn't planned anything really. But now I found myself pulling into the visitor parking lot of the Madison, an upscale boutique hotel where Daniel and I had once spent our 5th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost. On me. Our last anniversary had been celebrated in Paris. Our next would never come. The elegant lobby was quiet at this hour, the afternoon lull before business travelers returned from their meetings. I approached the front desk, summoning the poised demeanor I'd perfected as Daniel's wife at countless firm events. "I'm here to see Daniel Matthews, please. His wife," I added, still technically true. The young man at the desk smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Matthews. He's in suite 712. Would you like me to call up?" "No need," I said smoothly. "I'd like to surprise him." In the elevator, I caught my reflection again in the mirrored walls. I looked different somehow, still exhausted, still pale, but there was something new in my eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there this morning. I stepped out onto the 7th floor, my heart pounding against my ribs as I walked down the hushed corridor. What was I doing here? What did I expect to accomplish? Margaret had advised me to wait, to let her team handle everything, but something in me needed to see Daniel's face when I told him about the twins. About what my grandmother had done. I raised my hand to knock on door 712, but hesitated when I heard voices inside. Daniel's voice and a woman's. Laughing. My hand fell to my side as a cold realization washed over me. I'd been so stunned by his request for divorce, so blindsided that I hadn't stopped to ask the most obvious question. Why now? What had changed? Now I knew, or at least I had a strong suspicion. I knocked, 3 sharp raps that silenced the voices inside. Footsteps approached, and then the door swung open. Daniel's expression shifted from annoyance to shock when he saw me. "Olivia, what are you—" "Who is it, Danny?" called the female voice from inside the suite. Danny. In 8 years of marriage, I had never once called him Danny. I pushed past him into the suite. It was spacious and elegantly appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, was a woman I recognized immediately. Vanessa Porter, the new paralegal at Daniel's firm. Young, beautiful, and clearly comfortable in my husband's hotel suite. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering when she saw me. "You must be Daniel's wife." "Soon-to-be ex-wife, apparently," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I turned to Daniel. "Well, this explains the sudden divorce. How long has this been going on?" Daniel at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Olivia, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like you're having an affair with your paralegal, which would explain why you suddenly decided our marriage was over. The minute I told you I was pregnant." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Pregnant? You didn't say she was pregnant." She set down her wine glass and stood, gathering her purse. "I should go." "No, please stay," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "This concerns you too, in a way." Daniel moved between us. "Olivia, you're upset. We should talk privately." "Like you wanted to talk privately this morning when you handed me divorce papers?" I opened my purse and pulled out the ultrasound photos, tossing them onto the coffee table. "Congratulations, Daniel, it's twins." The color drained from his face as he stared at the grainy images. "Twins?" "Yes. 2 babies. Double the child support, I suppose." I smiled without humor. "Though that's probably the least of your financial concerns right now." Confusion creased. His brow. "What are you talking about?" "I just came from Margaret Blackwell's office. You remember her? My grandmother's attorney? It seems Grandma Eleanor had some concerns about you that I foolishly dismissed." Daniel's expression darkened. "Your grandmother never liked me. She was a bitter old woman who saw right through you. I finished for him. And who put contingencies in my trust fund specifically designed to protect me if you ever abandoned me during a pregnancy. Behind him, Vanessa was edging toward the door, clearly sensing she'd stepped into something far more complicated than a simple affair. Your trust fund is a pittance, Daniel scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. Barely worth mentioning in our divorce settlement. That's what I thought too, I said, opening the folder Margaret had given me. Until today. Would you like to know what happens now that you've triggered the contingency clause? It's really quite fascinating. I don't have time for this, he said, glancing at his watch, that habit again. My lawyer will contact yours. We'll handle this through proper channels. First, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. The trust immediately converts from a standard spendthrift trust to what Margaret called a divorce protection butterfly trust. The assets triple, yes, triple, through an insurance policy my grandmother apparently took out specifically for this scenario. Daniel's expression was shifting from dismissive to concerned. What are you talking about? What assets? Second, I went on, gaining momentum. There's a corporate component I never knew about. Do you remember that boutique hotel chain my grandmother's second husband founded? The one with 14 locations across New England? Daniel nodded slowly, wariness creeping into his features. Turns out, Grandma maintained a controlling interest, held in a separate trust. A trust that, as of this morning, transferred entirely. To me? I smiled, recalling Margaret's precise words. But here's the interesting part. Guess who the minority stakeholder in that hotel chain is? Daniel's face had gone completely white now. Carruthers Investments, he whispered. Exactly. Your firm's biggest client. The client whose business secured your partnership track. I closed the folder, my heart racing but my voice steady. So, you see, Daniel, you've created quite a complicated situation for yourself. Your firm won't be pleased to learn that their rising star is now entangled in a messy divorce with the majority owner of their most important client's pet investment. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Vanessa had frozen by the door, her eyes wide as she looked between us. Daniel's shock was quickly morphing into anger. You're bluffing. There's no way your grandmother could have orchestrated something this elaborate. Eleanor Blackwell built and sold 3 companies before she was 50, I reminded him. She played the long game better than anyone. And apparently, she never trusted you. This is absurd, he snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Even if what you're saying is true, which I doubt, you have no experience running companies or managing investments. That's true, I acknowledged. Fortunately, the trust includes a management team until I decide whether to sell or keep my interests. Either way, your firm's relationship with Carruthers is now dependent on how amicably this divorce proceeds. You can't do this, Daniel said, his voice rising. You can't use business leverage to extort better divorce terms. It's unethical, possibly illegal. I'm not extorting anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply informing you of my new financial position before you proceed with your plans. What you do with this information is entirely up to you. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. Oh, and Daniel? Margaret will be contacting your lawyer tomorrow about establishing appropriate support for the twins. I suggest you adjust your expectations about how this divorce will unfold. As I walked out, I heard Vanessa's confused voice. Danny, what just happened? What had just happened, indeed? I made it all the way to my car before the shaking started. Violent tremors that ran through my entire body as the full impact of the day washed over me. I was pregnant with twins. My marriage was over. And my grandmother, years after her death, had just handed me the power to determine exactly how this divorce would proceed. I started the car with trembling hands, pulling out of the hotel parking lot just as my phone began buzzing again. Daniel, no doubt, processing what I'd told him, perhaps calling to threaten or cajole or negotiate. I didn't answer. For the first time since I'd met Daniel Matthews, I held all the cards. and I intended to play them exactly as my grandmother would have wanted, with precision, with purpose, and without mercy for the man who thought he could discard me and his unborn children without consequences. As I drove through the darkening city toward the house that would soon be mine alone, one thought kept circling through my mind. Grandma Eleanor had seen this coming somehow. She had looked at my charming, ambitious husband and recognized something I had been too in love to see. A man who would abandon his pregnant wife the moment something better came along. The trust fund had other plans indeed. I barely slept that night. How could I? In the span of 24 hours, my entire life had been upended. Pregnancy confirmed, husband gone, financial situation transformed. I lay awake in our king-sized bed, my hand resting protectively over my stomach, where two tiny lives were growing, oblivious to the chaos surrounding them. By morning, my phone had accumulated 17 missed calls and 28 text messages, most from Daniel, a few from his lawyer, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all and made myself a cup of herbal tea, avoiding the coffee I'd loved but now couldn't stomach. The house felt different in the morning light, larger somehow, despite the crushing weight of memories pressing in from every corner. The framed photos on the mantel, our wedding day, beach vacations, holiday parties, now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. A life built on illusions. At precisely 9 a.m., Margaret called as promised. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm with concern. "I'm existing," I answered honestly. "It doesn't feel real yet." "That's understandable. Shock takes time to process." She paused. "Daniel's lawyer has been calling my office since 7 a.m. Apparently your husband had a rather sleepless night." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I imagine finding out your pregnant wife controls your professional fate would disrupt anyone's sleep. Indeed. I could hear the smile in Margaret's voice. "Are you ready to hear the next steps?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. Tell me everything." For the next half hour, Margaret outlined the full extent of my grandmother's contingency plan. The trust fund I'd thought was modest, around $300,000, had been merely the visible portion. The hidden assets, triggered by Daniel's abandonment, were substantial. Controlling interest in the hotel chain, minority stakes in 3 commercial properties in Boston, and a diversified investment portfolio worth nearly $4.2 million. "Your grandmother was an extremely shrewd businesswoman," Margaret explained. "She kept these assets compartmentalized for 2 reasons: tax efficiency and to protect you from potential pressure from Daniel." "She really didn't trust him," I murmured, still struggling to reconcile the grandmother who had seemed to adore Daniel at family gatherings with the woman who had secretly built financial fortifications against him. "Eleanor had excellent instincts about people," Margaret said diplomatically. "She wanted to give your marriage every chance to succeed without interference, but she also wanted insurance in place if things went sideways." "And she specifically anticipated this exact scenario? Daniel leaving me during pregnancy?" Margaret hesitated. "Not exactly. The trust had several trigger conditions. Abandonment during pregnancy was one, but there were others. Infidelity discovered during illness, financial exploitation, documented abuse. Your grandmother covered multiple scenarios where she felt, you might be particularly vulnerable." A chill ran through me. "Did she expect my marriage to fail?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "She hoped for the best, but planned for the worst. That was Eleanor's way in everything." As Margaret continued explaining the intricacies of the trust's activation, a notification appeared on my laptop, an email from Daniel with the subject line, "We need to talk." I opened it while Margaret was still speaking. "Olivia, what you did yesterday was completely inappropriate. Ambushing me at the hotel, making wild claims about your grandmother's trust, threatening my professional relationships. This isn't like you. I understand you're emotional right now. Pregnancy hormones can affect judgment, and the news about Twins is obviously overwhelming for both of us. But we need to handle this divorce rationally. My lawyer has prepared a fair settlement proposal that includes generous support for the children. Meet me at Westfields at 1 p.m. today to discuss terms privately, before this situation escalates further and forces me to take a more aggressive legal position. This doesn't need to be messy. Daniel, the condescension dripping from every word made. My blood boil. Pregnancy hormones affecting my judgment? A generous settlement he'd prepared without any input from me? I closed the email without responding. Olivia? Are you still there? Margaret's voice brought me back. Yes, sorry. Daniel just emailed, wanting to meet to discuss terms privately. Absolutely not, Margaret said immediately. No private meetings, no discussions without counsel present. That's standard advice for any divorce, but especially one with these complications. He's trying to intimidate me, I said, recognizing the tactic from watching Daniel negotiate with opposing counsel over the years. He thinks if he can get me alone, he can manage me. Make me doubt what you've told me or scare me into a quick settlement. Precisely. And that's not happening. Margaret's tone was steel. Now, I've assigned Alexis Chen from our family law division to handle the divorce proceedings specifically. She's brilliant, methodical, and frankly, terrifies opposing counsel. She'll be reaching out today to coordinate. After finishing with Margaret, I sat in the quiet house, contemplating my next moves. Daniel had always controlled the narrative of our marriage, where we lived, who we socialized with, how we spent our money. Even my decision to leave my career had been subtly engineered by him. You're so stressed all the time with that job, he'd said. I make enough for both of us. Think how much happier you'd be focusing on our home, our future family. I'd believed him, surrendered my independence willingly, convinced it was a choice made from love. Now I saw it for what it was. Isolation, dependency, control. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Matthews, this is Alexis Chen from Blackwell Partners. Available to speak when convenient. Priority items, securing your medical insurance coverage and freezing joint accounts. Please call my direct line. It was time to start rebuilding. I called Alexis immediately. By noon, we had a strategy in place. Joint accounts temporarily frozen, with emergency provisions for my medical expenses. Daniel's access to the house remotely disabled, and preliminary divorce papers being drawn up that would establish temporary support during the pregnancy. Didn't respond to Daniel's lunch invitation. Instead, I drove to my sister Kate's old apartment building across town. She had moved to Seattle 3 years ago, but had kept her small downtown condo as a rental property. Now, I had a proposition for her. Kate answered my video call immediately. Her face creased with concern. Liv, what's going on? You look terrible. Despite everything, I laughed. Kate had never been one to soften her words. Thanks. That's exactly what a pregnant woman wants to hear. Pregnant? Her shriek was so loud I had to lower the volume. Oh my God! Does Daniel know? Is that why you're calling? Wait, why do you look like you've been crying for days if you're pregnant? Isn't this what you both wanted? It's a long story, I said, feeling the weight of it all pressing down again. The short version, I'm pregnant with twins. Daniel is having an affair with his paralegal. He asked for a divorce yesterday, and Grandma Eleanor apparently had a secret plan for this exact scenario that's now turning Daniel's life upside down. Kate's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed, Holy shit, Liv, I don't even have words. Neither did I, believe me. I took a deep breath. But I need to ask you something. Is your condo still being rented? Kate shook her head. The tenants moved out last month. I was about to list it again next week. Why? I need a place to stay. Somewhere Daniel wouldn't think to look for me immediately. Somewhere I can just breathe and figure out what comes next. Understanding dawned in my sister's eyes. It's yours for as long as you need it. I'll email you. The door codes. The place is cleaned and furnished still. Thank you. The relief of having somewhere to go, somewhere that wasn't saturated with memories of Daniel, was overwhelming. Do you want me to come home? Kate asked, already reaching for what looked like her calendar. I can probably get a flight tomorrow. No, stay there. I'm okay. I managed a small smile. Better than okay, actually. I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. After arranging details with Kate, I packed a suitcase with essentials. I wasn't running. Away, this was strategic retreat. A chance to gather my strength away from the emotional minefield of the home Daniel and I had shared. As I was loading the suitcase into my car, my phone rang. Daniel again. This time, I answered. Where were you? He demanded without preamble. I waited at Westfield's for an hour. I was busy securing my future, I replied calmly, and our children's future. His sharp intake of breath told me he still hadn't fully processed the reality of twins. This is exactly what I meant about making emotional decisions. Where are you going? That's my child you're carrying. Children, I corrected. Twins, Daniel. And right now, my priority is their health and my well-being. My lawyer will contact yours with our terms. Our terms? Olivia, be realistic. You don't hold the cards here. I thought about the trust fund, about the hotel chain, about the look on his face when I'd revealed just a fraction of what my grandmother had put in place. Actually, I said quietly, I think you'll find I do. Goodbye, Daniel. I ended the call and drove away from the house we'd shared, toward an uncertain future that, for the first time in years, would be shaped by my choices alone. Kate's condo was exactly what I needed, a neutral space untouched by memories of Daniel, minimalist and calm with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. I spent the first evening just sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson, trying to reconcile the life I'd thought I had with the reality now unfolding. To truly understand how I ended up here, pregnant with twins, newly separated and wielding unexpected financial power, you need to know how Daniel and I began. 8 years earlier, I was 28 and building a promising career in event management for a high-end hotel group. I specialized in corporate retreats and executive functions, which meant I worked closely with the city's top law firms, investment banks, and consulting agencies. I was good at my job, organized, personable, detail-oriented, and I loved the independence my salary afforded me. The gala where I met Daniel was for a children's charity his firm supported. Carruthers Investments was the main sponsor, and as one of their most important legal partners, Daniel's firm had a prominent presence. I'd been coordinating with his assistant for weeks, arranging seating charts and managing special requests. I knew his name well before I met the man. I was checking the VIP table arrangements when he approached, tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored tuxedo, with confident blue eyes and an easy smile that suggested he was accustomed to people doing exactly what he wanted. You must be Olivia Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. Marcus has been singing your praises for weeks. Apparently, you're the only event coordinator who's ever managed to accommodate Mr. Carruthers' impossible demands without breaking a sweat. I shook his hand, maintaining professional composure despite noticing how attractive he was. Mr. Matthews, everything is arranged as requested. Your firm's tables are near the stage, with Mr. Carruthers positioned for easy access to the exit. As specified. Daniel, please, he said, his smile warming. And I'm actually here about a personal request, not a professional one. Something in his gaze made my pulse quicken. Oh? I was hoping you might save me a dance later, unless that violates some professional code of conduct? It did, technically. My company preferred we maintain strict boundaries with clients. But something about the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in a room of hundreds, made me hesitate. I generally don't mix business with pleasure, Mr. Matthews. Daniel, he corrected again. And technically, your client is my assistant Marcus, not me. So perhaps this falls into a gray area? I couldn't help but smile at his persistence. I'll consider it. I'll take that as a promising start, he replied, his confidence never wavering. I'll find you after the speeches. He did find me, and we did dance. One dance became 3, which became a conversation on the terrace under starlight, which became an exchange of phone numbers. By the end of the evening, I'd broken my professional rule and agreed to have dinner with him the following week. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Daniel was charming, attentive, seemingly perfect in every way. He sent flowers to my office, remembered small details from our conversations, planned elaborate dates that showed thought and care. When he took me to his family's lake house for a weekend, he recreated our first dance on the dock under string lights. I knew you were special the moment I saw you, he told me that night, cradling my face in his hands, so competent, so poised. But with this fire in your eyes, I couldn't look away. I fell hard and fast. How could I not? Daniel represented everything I thought I wanted: stability, success, romance. He spoke about marriage within 3 months, introduced me to his colleagues as the woman who finally captured me, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life together. There were warning signs, looking back. Small moments when his mask slipped to reveal something colder underneath. Like when a waiter mixed up our order and Daniel's charming demeanor instantly transformed into cutting condescension. Or how he subtly criticized my apartment, my clothes, my friends, always framed as helpful suggestions rather than judgments. You have such potential, Olivia, he'd say. I just want to help you shine. I rationalized these moments as evidence of his high standards, his attention to detail, the same traits that made him successful in his career. And when he proposed 6 months after we met, presenting a diamond ring that must have cost a small fortune, I said yes without hesitation. My parents had both passed away years earlier. My father from heart disease when I was in college, my mother from cancer shortly after. Kate was my only immediate family, and she lived across the country. My grandmother, Eleanor, became my closest family support. Grandma Eleanor was a force of nature, widowed twice, self-made wealthy through strategic investments and business ventures, fiercely independent even in her 70s. She'd raised my mother alone after my grandfather died young, building her first business while juggling single parenthood. When I brought Daniel to meet her at her Cambridge home, she was gracious but reserved. She asked pointed questions about his family, his career goals, his financial philosophy, all delivered with a smile, but with an intensity that made Daniel shift in his seat. He's a bit traditional, isn't he? She observed after he left. Very focused on appearances. He's ambitious, I defended. He has plans for our future. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. And what about your plans, darling? Your career is going so well. We'll figure it out, I said confidently. Daniel supports my independence. Grandma Eleanor didn't argue, but I caught the skeptical arch of her eyebrow. At the time, I dismissed it as generational difference. A woman who'd fought for her place in male-dominated industries, worrying unnecessarily about modern marriage. Just promise me one thing, she said before I left. Keep something of your own. Every woman needs resources that belong to her alone. I promised, not fully understanding what she meant or why it mattered. I was in love. Daniel and I were partners. What was his was mine, and vice versa. That's what marriage meant, wasn't it? The wedding was lavish. Daniel's partners at the firm expected nothing less. And afterward, we moved into a beautiful brownstone in the historic district. Daniel's name was on the deed. It's simpler this way for the mortgage, he explained when I questioned it. With your name off the property, we qualify for better terms since my income is higher. It's still our home. I believed him, just as I believed him when he suggested I consider leaving my job after a particularly stressful event left me exhausted. "You don't need to work these crazy hours," he said, massaging my shoulders as I nursed a stress headache. "I make more than enough. For both of us. Think about it. You could focus on making our house a home, maybe do some charity work like the other partners' wives. And when we have children, you'd already be established at home." The idea was tempting, especially presented as his concern for my well-being rather than his desire to mold me into the perfect lawyer's wife. 3 months after our wedding, I resigned from my position, promising to stay in touch with my colleagues and maybe do some consulting work to keep my skills fresh. That consulting work never materialized. Somehow, there was always a reason to postpone: a dinner with Daniel's colleagues, renovations to oversee, social obligations that seemed to multiply once I became a full-time wife. My world gradually contracted until it revolved entirely around Daniel's needs, Daniel's schedule, Daniel's ambitions. I didn't notice how isolated I'd become until my grandmother was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Suddenly, I was spending days at her bedside, reconnecting with her old friends and business associates who came to visit. Vibrant, independent women who asked pointed questions about my life that I struggled to answer. "Still happy with your decision to leave your career?" one of her friends asked when Daniel wasn't present. "Eleanor mentioned you were quite successful." "Of course," I said automatically, the answer expected of a contented wife. "Daniel's career keeps us both busy." The woman, a retired judge in her 70s, gave me a long look. "And if something happened to Daniel tomorrow? What then?" I had no answer. I'd never considered the possibility of life without Daniel. My identity had become so intertwined with his that imagining independence felt like contemplating amputation. That conversation planted a seed of unease that grew as I watched my grandmother's health decline. Eleanor had always been my model of self-sufficiency, a woman who navigated life on her own terms. Somewhere along the way, I'd abandoned that example in favor of the security Daniel offered. In her final weeks, Grandma Eleanor asked to speak with me alone. Daniel had driven me to the hospice but waited outside, checking emails on his phone. "Olivia," she said, her voice weak but her eyes still sharp, "are you truly happy? Tell me the truth now. No platitudes." I hesitated, suddenly unable to maintain the cheerful facade I'd perfected. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I've lost myself." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. "It happens so gradually you barely notice, doesn't it? The small surrenders that become a complete capitulation." Tears welled in my eyes. "I love him, Grandma." "I know you do." She patted my hand. "But love shouldn't require erasure, darling. Remember who you were before him. That woman still exists." 3 days later, she slipped away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small but dignified, and Daniel was appropriately supportive, handling arrangements and fielding condolences. I was too grief-stricken to notice the long private conversation he had with Margaret Blackwell, or the documents my grandmother had signed in her final days. I learned about the trust fund at the reading of the will, a modest but meaningful inheritance that Daniel immediately suggested we invest for our future family. "Let's talk to my financial advisor," he said on the drive home. "There are tax advantages to folding this into our joint investments." For the first time, I heard my grandmother's voice in my mind. "Keep something of your own." "I'd like to keep it separate," I said quietly, in memory of Grandma. It was our first real argument. Daniel couldn't understand why I'd want to maintain a separate account when marriage is about sharing everything. Eventually, he relented, but with visible frustration. "Fine, keep your little nest egg if it makes you happy. It's not like it's enough to matter anyway." Little did either of us know just how much it would eventually matter, or how prescient my grandmother's concerns about Daniel would prove to be. Looking back now from the sanctuary of my sister's condo, I could see the warning signs so clearly. They flashed like neon in my memory, moments when the mask slipped and Daniel's true nature revealed itself. How had I missed them? Or perhaps the better question, why had I chosen to ignore them? The first major red flag appeared 6 months into our marriage. We were invited to a dinner at the home of Julian Carruthers, the head of the investment firm that was Daniel's most important client. The invitation was a coup for Daniel, a sign that he was being noticed by the firm's top echelon. "This is huge," Daniel said as we prepared for the evening, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "Carruthers never invites junior partners to his home. This could fast-track my career." I was nervous, but excited for him. "What should I expect, Daniel?" Paused, studying me with sudden intensity. "You need to be perfect tonight. These people are different from your hotel colleagues. More sophisticated, more particular." That stung, but I nodded. "I'll follow your lead." "Wear the blue dress," he instructed. "The one from Saks, and the pearl earrings I bought you for Christmas. Nothing flashy. Conservative elegance is key with the Carruthers crowd." I complied, eager to support his big moment. As we drove to the Carruthers estate in the wealthy suburb of Brookline, Daniel drilled me on topics to avoid: politics, religion, anything controversial, and people to impress: Julian's wife, Marianne, his right-hand man, Thomas Beck. "And for God's sake," he added as we approached the imposing gates, "don't mention your event planning background. If anyone asks what you do, you're involved in charity work." "Why would I lie about my career?" I asked, genuinely confused. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Because we're not here as Olivia and Daniel tonight. We're here as a junior partner and his appropriate wife. This isn't about you." The evening started well. I stayed close to Daniel, smiled at the right moments, made appropriate small talk. Julian Carruthers was a surprisingly down-to-earth man in his 60s, with a dry wit and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. His wife Marianne was gracious but reserved, clearly accustomed to evaluating newcomers to their circle. During cocktails, I found myself briefly separated from Daniel when he was pulled into a conversation with some senior partners. Marianne approached me with a fresh glass of sparkling water. "Daniel seems very ambitious," she observed, watching him charm the group of older men. "How are you finding life as a law firm wife? It can be an adjustment." "It's been interesting," I replied carefully. "Different from my previous work rhythm." "Oh? What did you do before?" Her question seemed genuinely interested. Before I could consider Daniel's warning, I answered honestly. "I was an event manager for the Grandview Hotel Group. Corporate events, mostly, which is actually how Daniel and I met." Marianne's eyes lit up. "Really? We used Grandview for our foundation's gala last year. Wonderful team. Did you work with Sarah Hensley by any chance?" The conversation flowed easily after that. Sarah had been my mentor, and Marianne knew her well through charity work. We discovered several mutual connections, and soon we were discussing the challenges of coordinating large-scale fundraisers. "You know," Marianne said thoughtfully, "our foundation is looking for someone with exactly your experience to help reorganize our annual giving program. It's part-time, perfect for someone who wants to maintain professional skills while supporting a spouse's career. Would you be interested?" My heart leapt at the opportunity. "I'd love to discuss it further." "Wonderful. I'll have my assistant contact you next week." I was still glowing from this interaction when Daniel appeared at my side, his hand gripping my elbow a bit too firmly. "I see you've met my wife," he said to Marianne, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Indeed. And what a find she is," Marianne replied. "Did you know you married one of the best event planners in the city? We used her team for our foundation gala." Daniel's expression froze for a microsecond before he recovered. "Olivia was certainly excellent at her job. We're just thankful. She's now able to focus on our home life." "Actually," I interjected, Marianne and I were discussing a potential opportunity with the Carruthers Foundation. The drive home was arctic. As soon as we were in the car, Daniel exploded. "What the hell were you thinking?" I specifically asked. "You not to mention your hotel job, and instead you're networking for employment? At the most important dinner of my career?" Marianne brought it up, I defended. And it went well. She was impressed. "I don't care if she was impressed with you," Daniel snapped. "My career depends on these people's perceptions. Do you think Julian Carruthers wants his top legal counsel to have a wife working for his charity like some desperate social climber?" "That's ridiculous," I said, genuinely confused. "Why would my professional capabilities reflect poorly on you?" "Because it suggests I can't provide for my family," Daniel hissed. "It makes me look weak." I stared at him, suddenly seeing something I hadn't before, a deep insecurity beneath his confident exterior, a fragility to his ego that required constant support. "Daniel, no one thinks that way anymore. Marianne seemed to value professional women. Drop it," he interrupted. "You're not taking that position. End of discussion." I didn't drop it. The next day, I called Sarah, my old mentor, to ask about the Carruthers Foundation. She confirmed it was a prestigious organization and that working with Marianne would be an excellent opportunity. When Marianne's assistant called to schedule a meeting, I agreed without consulting Daniel. It was only part-time, I reasoned. A way to keep my skills sharp while still being the supportive wife he wanted. The morning of the meeting, Daniel discovered my plans when he overheard me confirming the appointment. "Cancel it," he demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "No," I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "This is important to me." What followed was our worst fight to date. Daniel didn't raise his voice, that wasn't his style, but his words were cutting, designed to make me doubt myself. "You're being selfish," he said. "After everything I've done to give you this life, you can't make this one sacrifice? Do you know how it will look if a junior partner's wife takes a charity job with our biggest client? Like she's skilled and valued?" I countered. His expression darkened. "Like she doesn't trust her husband to provide. Like she's hedging her bets. That's not what this is about, isn't it?" He moved closer, his voice softening to that persuasive tone he used in negotiations. "Olivia, we talked about this. You agreed that focusing on our home would be best, especially when we start our family. Do you really want to compromise that plan for some vanity project?" I hesitated, his words finding their target. We had been trying for a baby for several months without success. The fertility specialist had mentioned stress as a possible factor. "I just want something of my own," I said finally, echoing my grandmother's words. Daniel's expression shifted to one of hurt disappointment. "I thought I was enough for you. I thought our life together was enough." The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. How could I hurt him like this when he'd given me everything? A beautiful home, financial security, status in a world I'd only glimpsed before meeting him. I canceled the meeting with Marianne. When her assistant asked why, I mumbled something about family priorities. The woman's pause spoke volumes. "I understand," she said finally. "Marianne will be disappointed. She thought you had remarkable potential." That night, Daniel brought home flowers and my favorite chocolates. "I'm proud of you," he said, kissing my forehead. This was the right decision for us. Us. Always us. Never me. It was the first of many similar incidents. Anytime I showed interest in resuming my career, reconnecting with former colleagues, or developing independent interests, Daniel found a way to redirect me. Sometimes through guilt, sometimes through charm, occasionally through carefully rationed displeasure that made me desperate to regain his approval. Another significant warning appeared during our second year of marriage, when we attended a dinner party hosted by one of Daniel's colleagues. The wife of a senior partner pulled me aside during the evening. "How are you really doing, Olivia?" she asked, her voice lowered. "You seem different lately." I didn't know Sandra well, but something in her concerned expression broke through my practiced smile. "I'm fine. Just a little tired." She glanced across the room where Daniel was holding court, then back to me. "I recognize the signs, you know. I've been where you are." "What do you mean?" "The isolation, the subtle control, the way you check his expression before you speak." She squeezed my arm gently. "Harold was the same way when we first married. It took me years to reclaim myself." I pulled away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "Daniel and I are fine. He's just ambitious." "Of course," she said, backing off immediately. "But if you ever need to talk, well, some of us have formed a little lunch group. Partners' wives who maintain our own identities. You'd be welcome. Anytime." I never took her up on the offer. Instead, I reported the conversation to Daniel on the drive home, expecting him to laugh it off. He didn't laugh. His face darkened with anger. "Sandra Mitchell is a bitter, frustrated woman whose husband is considering divorce. She's poisonous, and I don't want you spending time with her." She seemed concerned, not bitter, I ventured. "She's trying to cause problems in happy marriages because her own is failing," Daniel said dismissively. "Promise me you'll keep your distance," I promised, adding Sandra to the growing list of people I avoided to keep peace in my marriage. Former colleagues, old friends whose lifestyles Daniel deemed immature or unprofessional. Even Kate, during a period when Daniel felt her progressive politics might damage his standing at the conservative firm. My world contracted further, until virtually all my social connections were through Daniel. His colleagues, his approved friends, his preferred social circle. The irony wasn't lost on me now, as I sat in Kate's condo, that my sister was the first person I'd reached out to when my marriage collapsed. The connection I'd preserved despite Daniel's disapproval had become my lifeline, and my grandmother, the woman whose concerns I'd dismissed as outdated, had somehow foreseen exactly the protection I would need when Daniel's true nature finally revealed itself completely. After 3 years of marriage, Daniel and I began trying for a baby. I had just turned 31, and Daniel, at 36, was finally established enough at the firm to consider expanding our family. Or at least, that's how he framed it, as if children were another milestone on his carefully plotted career trajectory. "The timing is perfect now," he explained as we sat in our immaculate living room one evening. "Harrison made partner with his first child on the way, and Carruthers always comments on how he values family men. Plus, it will give you something meaningful to focus on." I bristled at the implication that my current life lacked meaning, but I kept that thought to myself. The truth was, I wanted children desperately. Despite the growing unease in my marriage, I clung to the hope that becoming parents would bring us closer, would give me the purpose I'd been missing since leaving my career. What I didn't anticipate was how difficult the journey would be, or how it would expose the deepest cracks in our relationship. After 6 months of trying without success, I suggested we see a fertility specialist. Daniel initially resisted. "It's too soon to worry," he said dismissively. "These things take time." "I'd just feel better if we had some tests," I persisted, "to make sure everything's okay." He studied me with that evaluating gaze that always made me feel like I was being cross-examined. "Is this about your age? Because 31 is hardly geriatric in reproductive terms." "No, it's about being proactive," I replied, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. "If there's an issue, I want to know sooner rather than later." Eventually, he relented, though he managed to schedule the appointment during a week when he was traveling for work, leaving me to attend alone. The doctor, a kind, soft-spoken woman named Dr. Winters, ran preliminary tests and asked detailed questions about my health history. "Everything looks normal on initial examination," she assured me. But we'll need your husband to come in for testing as well. Male factors contribute to infertility in about 40% of cases. When I relayed this to Daniel over the phone that evening, his response was immediate and defensive. "There's nothing wrong with me," he snapped. "This is a waste of time." "Though, doctor says it's standard procedure," I explained carefully. "Both partners need to be tested to get a complete picture." After much persuasion, Daniel agreed to schedule the test, though he complained about it for days leading up to the appointment. When the results came back normal for both of us, he was insufferable. "See? Exactly what I said. Unexplained infertility is just doctor speak for keep trying and stop worrying." Dr. Winters suggested lifestyle modifications, reducing stress, timing intercourse more strategically, eliminating alcohol. I embraced these changes wholeheartedly. Daniel did not. "I'm not organizing my entire life around baby making," he declared after I mentioned that he'd been out drinking with colleagues during my projected fertile window. "It'll happen when it happens." Yet despite his apparent nonchalance, I noticed Daniel growing increasingly frustrated with each passing month. Sex became mechanical, scheduled, devoid of intimacy. He would check his watch before and after, as if our most private moments were just another appointment in his calendar. After a year of trying, Dr. Winters suggested we consider assisted reproductive technologies. "Given your test results and the duration you've been trying, IUI or possibly IVF might be appropriate next steps." This time, Daniel attended the appointment with me. He sat rigidly in his chair, asking pointed questions about success rates and costs. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing the financial investment against the potential return. "We'll try IUI first," he decided afterward, as if the choice were his alone to make. "It's less expensive and less invasive. If that doesn't work after 3 cycles, then we can discuss IVF." The clinical approach to creating our family broke something in me. This wasn't how I'd imagined my path to motherhood. Injection schedules, hormone medications, Daniel treating the process like a business transaction. But I wanted a baby so badly that I pushed aside my discomfort. The first IUI failed. So did the second. By the third attempt, I was an emotional wreck. Hormones raging from the medications, hope dwindling with each negative test. Daniel's support, initially strong, began to waver. "Maybe we should take a break," he suggested after the third failed cycle. "Focus on us for a while. You're becoming obsessed with this." "Obsessed?" I echoed, hurt beyond measure. "This is our future family we're talking about. And it will happen when it's meant to happen," he replied with that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "In the meantime, I need my wife back. The one who isn't crying all the time or scheduling sex like a military operation." We did take a break. 6 months of pretending we weren't both thinking about the baby we didn't have, of Daniel staying later at the office, of me researching fertility treatments alone at night. The distance between us grew, a chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. During this time, I received an unexpected call from Sarah, my former mentor from the hotel group. "Olivia," she said warmly, "I've been thinking about you. We're launching a new corporate retreat program and could use your expertise on a consulting basis. Very flexible hours, work from home. Would you be interested?" The opportunity felt like a lifeline, a chance to reclaim a piece of myself that had been dormant for too long. When I mentioned it to Daniel that evening, his reaction was surprisingly muted. "If that's what you want to do, fine. Maybe having something else to focus on will help you stop obsessing about babies." His easy acquiescence should have been my first clue that something had shifted. The Daniel who had vehemently opposed my working with the Carruthers Foundation was now indifferent. To my professional aspirations, at the time, I was simply relieved to avoid a fight and excited about the prospect of using my skills again. The consulting work was exactly what I needed. Challenging, fulfilling, connecting me to the professional world I'd left behind. For a few months, life improved. Daniel and I found a new rhythm, less pressured, more like the early days of our relationship. Then I discovered why he'd been so amenable to my taking on work. Daniel had been having an affair with a summer associate. At his firm, a relationship that had apparently begun during my third failed IUI cycle. The affair had ended badly, and the young woman had threatened to report it to the partners. I found out not from Daniel, but from Sandra Mitchell, the partner's wife who had tried to warn me years earlier. She called one morning while Daniel was at work. "Olivia, I wouldn't normally interfere, but you should know there's a situation at the firm involving Daniel. A summer associate named Rebecca has made certain allegations. It's being handled quietly. But I thought you deserved to know." The confrontation that evening was ugly. Daniel denied it at first, then minimized. It was just a few times it meant nothing, then blamed me. If you hadn't been so consumed with fertility treatments, so emotionally unavailable. I was devastated, but, to my own surprise, not. Broken. The consulting work had rekindled something in me, a sense of self-worth separate from my identity as Daniel's wife. I considered leaving him then. I packed a bag, called Kate, prepared to walk away from the marriage. Daniel's response was a masterclass in manipulation. He broke down in tears, something I'd never seen before, begged for forgiveness, promised therapy, both individual and couples. He admitted to a moment of weakness during a stressful period and vowed it would never happen again. "We've invested too much in this marriage to throw it away," he pleaded. "Think about the family we're trying to build. We can come back from this stronger." Against my better judgment, against Kate's explicit advice, I stayed. The investment felt too great to abandon. 5 years of marriage, thousands of dollars, infertility treatments. The dream of the family we'd planned together. I couldn't walk away, not without trying everything possible to save what we'd built. The reconciliation process was grueling. Weekly therapy sessions where Daniel said all the right things, made all the right promises. He became attentive again, bringing home flowers, planning date nights, even attending additional fertility appointments without complaint. 6 months after the affair revelation, we decided to try IVF. The financial commitment was substantial, but Daniel insisted we could afford it. "Nothing is more important than building our family," he said, holding my hand as we signed the treatment consent forms. "I want to be the father of your children, Olivia. That's all that matters to me now." I believed him. Maybe I needed to believe him. The alternative, that I had invested years of my life in a man who could betray me so completely, was too painful to consider. The first round of IVF was physically and emotionally demanding. Daily injections, frequent monitoring appointments, the surgical egg retrieval procedure that left me bloated and uncomfortable. Daniel was present for all of it, holding my hand through blood draws, administering injections when I couldn't reach, bringing me heating pads for the discomfort. When the cycle failed, all 5 embryos failing to implant or develop properly, I was crushed. Daniel seemed genuinely disappointed too, holding me as I cried through the night after receiving the negative test. "We'll try again," he promised, "as many times as it takes." We did try again 3 months later. This cycle produced better results. 8 viable embryos, 2 transferred fresh, the rest frozen for future attempts. The 2-week wait between embryo transfer and pregnancy testing was excruciating. I vacillated between cautious hope and preemptive grief, preparing myself for either outcome. When the clinic called with positive results, I couldn't believe it. My HCG levels were strong, indicating a successful implantation. Daniel and I celebrated. With a quiet dinner at home, both of us almost afraid to fully embrace the joy for fear it would be snatched away. Early ultrasounds confirmed a viable pregnancy with a strong heartbeat. As we passed the first trimester milestone, I began to relax, to believe that this might actually happen. Daniel seemed transformed, attentive, protective, excitedly discussing names and nursery designs. Our marriage felt healed, the affair a terrible chapter we'd moved beyond. The investment had paid off. Or so I thought, until the day I discovered I was carrying twins, and my husband decided our reconciliation had served its purpose. All those years of sacrifice, of putting his needs first, of forgiving the unforgivable, they culminated in a moment of perfect clarity. I had invested everything in a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. At 12 weeks pregnant, with the first trimester safely behind us, I decided to plan a special evening to celebrate this milestone. The morning sickness that had plagued me for weeks had finally subsided, and for the first time, I felt genuinely excited about the pregnancy rather than anxiously waiting for something to go wrong. I spent the day preparing Daniel's favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and chocolate soufflé for dessert. I set the dining room table with our wedding china, lit candles, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our last anniversary, a flowing emerald silk that still fit my barely changed figure. As I moved around the kitchen, I felt a fragile hope blooming. Perhaps the baby, I didn't yet know I was carrying twins, would be the thing that finally cemented our marriage, that made Daniel truly commit to our family in ways he'd always hesitated to before. I'd just taken the soufflés out of the oven when I heard his key in the lock. Daniel walked in, his face lighting up with surprise at the transformed dining room. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie and setting down his briefcase. "A celebration," I said, smiling as I handed him a glass of sparkling cider. "We made it through the first trimester. Doctor says the risk of miscarriage drops significantly now." His smile seemed genuine as he clinked his glass against mine. "To our growing family." The evening progressed better than I could have hoped. Daniel was attentive, asking questions about my recent doctor's appointment and sharing amusing stories from work. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like we were truly connecting, sharing this precious milestone as equal partners. After dessert, as we lingered at the table, Daniel reached across and took my hand. "I have news too," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I didn't want to overshadow your celebration, but they're announcing a new senior partner next month and Harrison practically confirmed it's going to be me." My heart swelled with genuine happiness for him. Daniel had been working toward partnership for our entire marriage. "That's wonderful. When will it be official?" "After the quarterly partners meeting," he said, squeezing my hand. "But it's already been decided. The youngest senior partner in the firm's history." "We should celebrate properly this weekend," I suggested. "Dinner. At Marcel's, perhaps? We could invite some of the partners and their wives." A strange expression flickered across his face. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about something related to that." I waited, still smiling, completely unprepared for what came next. With the partnership and the baby both happening, "I've been thinking about our living situation," he began, his tone shifting to something more measured, more careful. "This house is fine for now, but it's not really suitable for where my career is heading." "We could look for something larger," I offered. "Maybe in Wellesley? Those colonial homes you've always admired?" "That's not exactly what I had in mind." He withdrew his hand from mine. "The thing is, Olivia, senior partners at the firm have a certain image to maintain, a certain lifestyle that's expected." I nodded, still not understanding where this was going. "Harrison mentioned that Julian Carruthers has been asking about you. Apparently, Marianne still remembers your background in event planning." An uneasy feeling crept up my spine. "What does that have to do with our living situation?" Daniel's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "The partners' wives are expected to be active in the firm's social and philanthropic initiatives, especially the Carruthers Foundation events. It's part of the package." "I'm pregnant, Daniel. I'll hardly be planning galas with a newborn." "That's exactly my point." He stood up, moving to refill his glass with water. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I believe we need to consider hiring help once the baby arrives. A full-time nanny, possibly a housekeeper. That way you can focus on the social obligations that come with my new position. I stared at, him, the beautiful evening crumbling around me. You want me to hand our baby to a nanny so I can plan parties for your firm? That's oversimplifying it, he said, his tone taking on that patronizing quality I'd grown to dread. This is about our family's future. My partnership means financial security, the best schools for our child, opportunities most people can only dream of, but it comes with certain expectations. Expectations that I'll be what? The perfect corporate wife? Hosting dinner parties while someone else raises our baby? Daniel's patience visibly thinned. You're being dramatic. Plenty of successful couples employ childcare professionals. It doesn't mean we love our child any less. The word struck me like a physical blow. Our child. Not my career, not my ambition, but our child. Something that should have been equally precious to both of us, yet Daniel was already calculating its place in his professional ascent. I don't want a stranger raising our baby, I said firmly. I want to be present for those early years. And you can be, he countered smoothly, just not exclusively. The firm expects a certain level of social engagement from partners' spouses. That's the reality. Even for new mothers, especially for new mothers. Daniel's voice took on an edge of impatience. It demonstrates proper balance and priority. No one respects a partner whose career takes a back seat to family obligations. I felt sick, and not from pregnancy. So you expect me to pretend our baby isn't a priority? To perform the role of corporate wife while someone else witnesses our child's first smile, first steps, first words? Now you're just being emotional. He checked his watch, a gesture that felt like a dismissal. We don't need to decide everything tonight. I just wanted to start the conversation. The partnership announcement is still weeks away, and the baby won't be here for months. But something had shattered for me in that moment. The last illusion that Daniel and I wanted the same things, valued the same things. I saw with perfect clarity that our child would always be secondary to his ambition, just as I had been. I need some air, I said, standing up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Don't wait up. I grabbed my coat and keys, ignoring Daniel's confused protests. The night air was cool against my flushed skin as I walked briskly through our neighborhood, my thoughts racing. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one where I raised our child on my own terms, where Daniel's priorities didn't dictate our family life. It was a terrifying thought, but also strangely liberating. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. Remember who you were before him. That woman still exists. When I returned home hours later, the house was dark. Daniel had cleared the table and gone to bed, leaving no indication of our interrupted conversation. We didn't speak of it again the next day or the day after. The subject hung between us, unresolved but ever present. A week later, I had my regularly scheduled prenatal checkup. Daniel had attended the first few appointments, but had begged off this one, citing an important client meeting. Dr. Winters performed the routine ultrasound, her expression changing as she studied the screen. Well, she said, a smile spreading across her face. This explains your elevated HCG levels and stronger than expected morning sickness. Congratulations, Olivia. You're carrying twins. The world seemed to stop. Twins? I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. Yes, 2 healthy fetuses, both measuring right on track. She turned the screen toward me, pointing out 2 distinct shapes, 2 tiny flickering heartbeats. Would you like to know the sex, or would you prefer to wait? I want to know, I managed, still processing the revelation. It looks like 2 boys, she said, studying the images. Though it's still relatively early, so that could change. But I'm fairly confident. Twin boys, 2 babies, double the joy, double the responsibility, and double the complication for Daniel's carefully planned ascent to partnership. I left the doctor's office in a daze, the ultrasound photos clutched in my hand. Twins weren't part of the plan, Daniel's plan. One baby could be managed with a nanny, fit neatly into his vision for our life. But twins? Two babies needing attention, care, love? I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the steady rhythm of my thoughts. How would Daniel react? Would this change his expectations? Would he see that family needed to come first, at least during these early years? The house was empty when I arrived. Daniel had texted that he would be late. Another dinner with clients. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the ultrasound photos, trying to imagine Daniel's reaction when I told him. Best case scenario. He would be surprised but excited, would recognize that twins changed the equation, would adjust his expectations for my role as a partner's wife. Worst case scenario. He would see this as an even greater complication, would double down on his insistence on full-time help, would expect me to compartmentalize motherhood even more thoroughly. As the hours passed and evening deepened into night, my anxiety grew. I tried calling Daniel, but the call went straight to voicemail. I texted but received no reply. By midnight, I was pacing the living room, my imagination conjuring increasingly worrying scenarios. Had there been an accident? Was he working incredibly late? Or was he simply ignoring me, still annoyed about our unresolved conversation about childcare and my role after the babies, arrived? At 1:17 a.m., I heard his key in the lock. Daniel entered quietly, clearly assuming I would be asleep. When he saw me standing in the darkened living room, he startled. "Olivia, what are you doing up? It's not good for the baby to miss sleep." The concern would have seemed genuine if not for the faint scent of perfume that clung to his clothes, a fragrance I didn't recognize, if not for the slight smudge of lipstick on his collar, barely visible but unmistakable under the hallway light. In that moment, everything crystallized. The late nights, the missed calls, the sudden insistence that I resume a social role that would keep me busy, distracted, away from home for long stretches. History was repeating itself, but this time I was pregnant. With twins. "I had my appointment today," I said, my voice strangely calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Dr. Winters did an ultrasound." Daniel set down his briefcase, loosening his tie with practiced ease. "Everything okay?" "It's twins," I said, watching his face carefully. "Two boys." His expression froze, a series of emotions flickering across his features too quickly to identify. Shock, certainly, concern, calculation, and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like resentment. "Twins," he repeated, the word falling heavily between us. "Are you sure?" I handed him the ultrasound photos. 2 heartbeats, 2 babies, due in 6 months. Daniel stared at the images, his brow furrowed. Then he looked up at me, his expression now carefully composed into something resembling enthusiasm. "Well, this is unexpected, but we'll figure it out. The perfume, the lipstick, the late nights, the insistence on nannies and my return to social obligations. All the pieces fell into perfect, horrible alignment. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that when I told Daniel I was pregnant with twins, I had inadvertently triggered the event that would ultimately end our marriage. The week after discovering I was carrying twins, and the evidence of Daniel's likely new affair, was surreal. We existed in a strange limbo, going through the motions of normal life while a seismic shift rumbled beneath the surface of our marriage. Daniel was suddenly attentive again, arriving home at reasonable hours, asking about my prenatal vitamins, even suggesting we start looking at nursery designs. But there was a mechanical quality to his concern, as if he were playing a role he no longer believed in. I said nothing about the perfume, the lipstick, the late-night return. I simply watched and waited, gathering my strength for what I knew was coming. The truth arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, delivered not by Daniel, but by a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "You should know your husband has been seeing Vanessa Porter from his office for at least 3 months. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but as someone who's been in your position, I couldn't stay silent knowing you're pregnant. Take care of yourself and your baby." The message was unsigned, but I had my suspicions about the sender. Perhaps Sandra Mitchell, who had tried to warn me years ago. Or possibly another associate's wife who had witnessed something she couldn't ignore. I sat at the kitchen counter, staring at my phone until the screen went dark. Vanessa Porter. The new paralegal Daniel had mentioned several times, always in professional contexts. Young, brilliant, recently graduated from Harvard Law. I'd met her briefly at the firm's holiday party 6 months earlier. Oh, striking woman with confident eyes and an incisive mind that Daniel had praised effusively. I should have felt devastated, but instead, I felt oddly calm. This betrayal was almost a relief, confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, wasn't being hormonal or paranoid. I forwarded the text to Daniel without comment. Then I called Margaret Blackwell. "I need to know my options," I said when she answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Daniel is having another affair. I'm 12 weeks pregnant with twins. I want out." Margaret's response was immediate and businesslike. "Come to my office at 2. Bring any financial documents you can access easily, but don't do anything that might alert him that you're preparing to leave." I spent the morning in a strange, calm state of efficiency. I photographed statements from our joint accounts, made copies of our most recent tax returns, gathered the prenuptial agreement I'd signed before our wedding, a document I'd barely read at the time, trusting Daniel's assurance that it was just a formality, standard for anyone at the firm. Daniel called at 11:43 a.m., his voice tight with controlled panic. "We need to talk about that text you forwarded." "Yes, we do," I agreed. "But not over the phone. I'll be home this evening." "Olivia, it's not what it looks like. This is someone trying to cause trouble." "Tonight, Daniel," I interrupted. "I have an appointment this afternoon." "What appointment? Is it about the babies? I should be there." The concern in his voice almost sounded genuine. "Almost. It's not medical," I said. "We'll talk tonight." I arrived at Margaret's office precisely at 2, a folder of documents in hand and a determined set to my jaw that made her smile approvingly when she saw me. "There she is," Margaret said. I was wondering when Eleanor's granddaughter would finally show up. For the next 3 hours, Margaret and her associate Alexis Chen walked me through my options. The prenuptial agreement was indeed standard for lawyers at Daniel's firm, designed to protect the firm's interests as much as Daniel's. But it contained several vulnerabilities, particularly regarding children. The prenup was executed before Daniel made junior partner, Alexis explained. It doesn't account for his current compensation structure, which includes significant equity in the firm. More importantly, it contains no specific provisions for child support or custody arrangements. "That matters because," I prompted. "Because it gives us room to negotiate," Margaret interjected. "Family courts prioritize the welfare of children above prenuptial agreements. With twins on the way and evidence of Daniel's infidelity during your pregnancy, we have leverage." Alexis nodded in agreement. "Especially given his impending promotion to senior partner. Courts take into account potential future earnings when establishing support, not just current income." I listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions about timelines and logistics. We were deep in discussion about temporary living arrangements when Margaret's assistant knocked and entered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should see." She handed Margaret a tablet with a news site displayed. Margaret scanned the screen, her eyebrows rising. "Well, this is interesting timing." She passed the tablet to me. The headline read, Carruthers Investments announces major expansion into luxury hospitality sector. The article detailed how Julian Carruthers was significantly increasing his company's stake in a boutique hotel chain, the very chain my grandmother had controlled interest in, now part of my trust. This can't be a coincidence, I said, looking up at Margaret. Daniel must have known about this, the timing. Margaret was already typing rapidly on her computer. I need to make some calls. This changes things. She looked up at me, her expression serious. Olivia, I think it's time we discussed your grandmother's contingency plan in more detail. For the next hour, Margaret revealed the full extent of Eleanor's provisions. Not just the financial protections I'd already learned about, but the specific triggers that would activate them. Marriage dissolution during pregnancy was just one of several conditions Eleanor had anticipated. Your grandmother was extraordinarily thorough, Margaret explained. She created a legal structure that would remain dormant unless certain specific events occurred. Events that would indicate you were particularly vulnerable and in need of protection. Like my husband asking for a divorce while I'm pregnant, I said slowly. Exactly. Though technically he hasn't asked yet. But based on his pattern of behavior and this new development with Carruthers Investments, I believe he's planning to. Possibly very soon. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. He's going to wait until after the partnership announcement. He wants to secure his position at the firm before ending our marriage. Alexis nodded. That would be the strategic move. Once he's officially made senior partner, his position is more secure. But he doesn't know about the trust conditions, I said. About what happens if he leaves me during the pregnancy. No, Margaret confirmed. That was intentional on Eleanor's part. She believed that foreknowledge would only lead to manipulation. I sat back in my chair processing everything. So what do we do now? Margaret's smile was thin but determined. We wait. We let Daniel show his hand. The moment he formally asks for a divorce or takes any substantive step toward dissolution of the marriage while you're pregnant, the contingency plan activates automatically. And then, Olivia, you'll be in a position of strength few women in your situation ever experience. I returned home that evening prepared for a confrontation about the text message, about Vanessa Porter, about the lies and betrayal. Instead, I found an empty house and a brief note on the counter. Emergency client situation. Had to fly to Chicago. Back tomorrow. We'll talk then. The coward's way out. Another night to formulate his denial, to craft his defense, to strategize his approach. Typical Daniel. Always calculating. Always managing the narrative. I slept in the guest room that night, surrounded by pillows supporting my slightly swelling belly, my hand resting protectively over the place where my sons grew, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding them. In the morning, I received a text from Daniel. Flight delayed. Meeting with Carruthers' team now about hotel acquisition. We'll explain everything tonight. I love you. Those last 3 words, so casually offered, so utterly false, steeled my resolve. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the strength my grandmother had seen in me even when I couldn't see it myself. That afternoon, Margaret called with news that made everything suddenly terribly clear. Olivia, she said without preamble, my contact at Carruthers just confirmed something important. The hotel chain acquisition has been in development for months, with Matthews and Levine handling the legal work. Daniel's firm, I said, the pieces falling into place. Yes. And specifically, Daniel's team. He's been the lead counsel on this deal from the beginning. He knew exactly what he was doing when he decided to end your marriage. The moment of truth had arrived, though Daniel wasn't even present for it. My husband had been planning to leave me, while I was pregnant with his children, to capitalize on a business opportunity involving assets that would become mine the moment he asked for that divorce. The irony was breathtaking. The man who prided Himself, on seeing 10 moves ahead, had missed the most important piece on the board. "What happens now?" I asked, a strange calm settling over me. "Now," Margaret replied, "we prepare for Daniel to come home and show his true colors. And when he does, Olivia, I promise you this, he'll have no idea what's about to hit him." Daniel arrived home just after 7 the following evening. I was sitting in the living room, a cup of herbal tea growing cold beside me, my grandmother's journal open in my lap. Margaret had given it to me that afternoon. A leather-bound book I'd never seen before, filled with Eleanor's elegant handwriting and dated entries spanning the last year of her life. "Eleanor asked me to keep this until you might need it," Margaret had explained. "She said you'd know when the time was right," reading my grandmother's private thoughts, her observations about Daniel, her concerns for me, her meticulous planning for my protection, had been both heartbreaking and empowering. Eleanor had seen so clearly what I had refused to acknowledge. When Daniel walked through the door, his expression was carefully composed, the same look he wore in courtrooms and negotiations when he needed to appear contrite but confident. "Olivia," he began, setting down his briefcase, "we need to talk about that text message." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "We do." He sat across from me, maintaining a careful distance. "It's not what you think. Vanessa is a paralegal on the Carruthers acquisition. We've been working long hours together, which has sparked office gossip. Someone is trying to cause trouble. I studied him, this man I'd loved for 8 years. This consummate liar who believed I was still naive enough to accept his explanations without question." "That's interesting," I said, my voice steady. "Because I spoke with Vanessa yesterday." Flicker of alarm crossed his face before he regained control. "You called her? Olivia? That was incredibly inappropriate. She's a colleague." "Actually, she called me," I interrupted, the lie flowing easily. "She was quite upset. Apparently, you told her our marriage was essentially over, that you were waiting for the right time to leave me. She felt terrible when she learned I was pregnant." Daniel's face paled slightly. "She's lying. I never said that." "Really?" "Because it aligns perfectly with what you've been doing for the past 3 months. The late nights, the missed calls, the lipstick on your collar last week, the sudden partnership announcement coinciding with the Carruthers Hotel acquisition, an acquisition involving a chain my grandmother happened to have significant interests in." His expression shifted from faux concern to wary calculation. "What are you talking about? Your grandmother's investments have nothing to do with this." I closed Eleanor's journal and set it aside, leaning forward. "I know everything, Daniel. About Vanessa, about the acquisition, about your plans to wait until after the partnership announcement to ask for a divorce." For a moment, he said nothing, visibly recalculating his approach. Then his demeanor changed entirely, the concerned husband persona vanishing, replaced by the cold, tactical attorney I'd glimpsed in unguarded moments over the years. "Clearly someone has been feeding you stories," he said, his voice hardening. "Your grandmother's trust fund is modest at best. It has no connection to Carruthers, investments, or the hotel acquisition." "That's what I thought too," I replied, "until Margaret Blackwell showed me the complete trust documents, the ones you never knew existed." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Margaret Blackwell? You've been speaking with your grandmother's attorney without consulting me?" "That's my right," I finished for him, just as it was my grandmother's right to create provisions in her trust that would activate under certain conditions. Conditions like her granddaughter's husband abandoning her during pregnancy. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, his confident facade cracking. "This is absurd. Whatever Margaret told you, she's exaggerating the situation to drum up legal fees. Your grandmother's estate was straightforward. I reviewed the documents myself." "You reviewed what she wanted you to see," I corrected. "The base trust, the visible assets." "But there was much more, Daniel. a whole structure designed to protect me if you ever showed your true colors. He scoffed, but I could see the first hints of genuine concern in his eyes. And what exactly are these mysterious provisions supposed to do? They're already doing it, I said simply. The moment you began work on the Carruthers Hotel acquisition without disclosing your conflict of interest, the first phase activated. Margaret has been monitoring the situation for months. This caught him completely off guard. Conflict of interest? What conflict? The hotel chain Carruthers is acquiring? My grandmother maintained controlling interest through a separate family trust, a trust that transfers entirely to me under certain conditions, one of which is divorce filed during pregnancy. Daniel stared at me, his legal mind rapidly assessing implications. That's impossible. The ownership structure of the Meridian Hotel Group is clear. Carruthers is purchasing from a consortium of private equity investors. A consortium that includes Eleanor Blackwell Holdings, I confirmed. A shell company my grandmother established 20 years ago, managed through a series of blind trusts, very deliberately obscured for precisely this type of situation. For the first time in our marriage, I watched Daniel at a complete loss for words. He sank back into his chair, his expression cycling through disbelief, calculation, and the dawning horror of recognition. You're bluffing, he said finally, but without conviction. Call Julian Carruthers, I suggested. Ask him about the ownership verification his team requested last week. Ask why there's suddenly a hold on the acquisition paperwork your firm has been preparing for months. The color drained from Daniel's face as the full implications hit him. His career, his partnership, his carefully cultivated relationship with Carruthers, all potentially compromised. This is insane, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Eleanor couldn't possibly have orchestrated something this complex. My grandmother built and sold 3 companies before she was 50, I reminded him. She played chess while you were playing checkers, Daniel. She saw you clearly from the beginning, saw what you might do, what you might become. He stood again, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, visibly recalibrating. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, it doesn't change anything between us. We can work through this, Olivia. For the babies, if nothing else. The calculated mention of our children, twin boys he'd shown no genuine enthusiasm for, hardened my resolve. There's something else you should know, I said quietly. Something Margaret discovered during her review of the trust documents. Daniel tensed, clearly bracing for another revelation. The prenuptial agreement I signed? It includes a morality clause that renders it null and void in cases of infidelity during pregnancy. That's not possible, he snapped. I reviewed that document personally before the partners approved it. Yes, you did, I agreed. But apparently you missed page 17, paragraph 3, subsection B, the clause my grandmother's attorney insisted be added during the final revision. The one your firm accepted because they wanted to expedite our wedding to coincide with the Carruthers charity gala. Daniel's expression was thunderous now. You're making this up. No such clause exists. I reached for the folder on the coffee table and extracted a highlighted copy of our prenuptial agreement. See for yourself. He snatched the document, his eyes scanning the indicated section. As he read, his face darkened with fury. This is fraud, he hissed. This clause wasn't in the original draft. It was in the version I signed, I countered calmly. The version you were too busy to review carefully before the wedding because you were focused on impressing Julian Carruthers at the gala. Daniel threw the document down, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. So this is your plan? Use some legal technicality to extort a better divorce settlement? Threaten my career, my partnership, unless I give you what you want? No, Daniel. That would be your approach. I placed a protective hand over my stomach where our sons grew. I'm not you. I don't use people as stepping stones to get what I want. Then what exactly do you want? he demanded. The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Freedom? I want what my grandmother wanted for me, I said finally. A life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can do for someone else. A future where my children see their mother stand up for herself. And yes, Daniel, I want you to face consequences for your choices. His laugh was bitter, ugly. All this time, I thought you were this sweet, accommodating woman. Turns out you're just like your grandmother, manipulative, calculating. No, I corrected, rising to stand before him. I'm not calculating enough. If I were, I would have seen through you years ago. But I'm learning. The look he gave me was cold, assessing, any pretense of affection completely gone. This isn't over, Olivia. I have resources too. Connections. The best lawyers in the city. I'm counting on it, I replied. The higher the stakes, the more visible the fall. Daniel grabbed his keys from the table, his movements sharp with anger. I need to make some calls. We'll continue this discussion when you're being more reasonable. As he stormed toward the door, I called after him. Oh, and Daniel? Don't bother coming back tonight. I've changed the security codes and instructed the system to alert the police if you attempt to enter without my permission. He turned, a final flicker of disbelief crossing his face. You can't lock me out of my own house. Actually, I can, I corrected. The house is owned by a trust controlled by my grandmother's estate, another detail you never bothered to verify. So technically, it was never your house at all. The door slammed behind him with a finality that should have frightened me, but instead felt like liberation. The complete truth was finally revealed, all pretenses stripped away. Daniel had shown his true self, and I had finally found mine. My grandmother's journal lay beside me, open to an entry dated just weeks before her death. Olivia has more strength than she knows. When the time comes, she will find it. Eleanor had been right. The strength had been there all along, waiting for me to claim it. After Daniel stormed out, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a long-held tension had finally released. I moved through the rooms that had been my gilded cage for years, seeing them with new eyes. The carefully selected furniture, the tasteful artwork, the neutral palette that Daniel had insisted upon, all of it designed to project an image rather than create a home. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in months. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Daniel's attorney, a shark-like divorce specialist named Lawrence Keller, called at precisely 9 a.m. Mrs. Matthews, he began without preamble, I'm representing your husband in this unfortunate matter. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss terms for an amicable separation. My attorneys will contact you, I replied calmly. Until then, all communication should go through proper channels. Mrs. Matthews, his tone sharpened. In the interest of expediency. It's Ms. Reynolds now, I interrupted. And I believe I was clear about proper channels, Mr. Keller. I ended the call and immediately contacted Margaret, who sounded almost gleeful. Lawrence Keller, Daniel's not playing around. Keller specializes in aggressively protecting high-net-worth clients, particularly when there's a disparity in financial resources. She chuckled. Or at least, what he thinks is a disparity. This is going to be interesting. By noon, Alexis Chen had formally responded to Keller, establishing clear boundaries for communication and requesting an exhaustive list of financial disclosures, many of which would force Daniel to reveal details about his partnership compensation that he'd kept hidden from me during our marriage. While the lawyers began their dance, I received an unexpected call from Marianne Carruthers. Olivia, she said warmly, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Julian and I just heard about your situation from Margaret Blackwell, and we wanted to express our support. I was momentarily speechless. The Carruthers were Daniel's most important clients, the cornerstone of his career advancement. Their support was the last thing I expected. That's very kind of you, I managed finally. Not at all, Marianne continued. Eleanor was a dear friend of mine for many years. We served on several boards together. When she told me about her concerns regarding Daniel, I shared them, though I respected her desire to give your marriage every chance to succeed. The revelation stunned me. You knew my grandmother was worried about Daniel. Of course. Eleanor didn't make financial decisions lightly, especially when it came to protecting you. Marianne paused. That offer I made years ago, the position with our foundation, it wasn't a coincidence. Eleanor asked me to provide an opportunity that might help you maintain professional connections independent of Daniel. The pieces clicked into place. What I'd interpreted as a chance encounter had been deliberately orchestrated by my grandmother, another attempt to protect me that Daniel had thwarted. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't need to say anything, Marianne assured me. But Julian and I would like to meet with you next week, if you're feeling up to it. There are some aspects of the hotel acquisition situation that we'd like to discuss directly, without lawyers present. Just a conversation between old friends. Old friends. The description warmed me unexpectedly. I'd like that, I said. After hanging up, I sat on the patio, absorbing the implications of Marianne's call. The Carruthers, Daniel's ticket to the EC. Partnership he'd coveted for years, were reaching out to me directly, bypassing him and his firm completely. The power dynamics had shifted seismically in just 24 hours. That afternoon, Margaret called with news that confirmed just how dramatically the tables had turned. The partners at Matthews and Levine have called an emergency meeting, she reported. Apparently, Julian Carruthers contacted the managing partner directly this morning to express concerns about a potential conflict of interest involving Daniel's work on the hotel acquisition. What does that mean for the partnership announcement? I asked. At minimum, it's delayed. At worst, for Daniel, it's off the table entirely. Margaret's satisfaction was evident. They've also formally requested verification of ownership structures for all Meridian Hotel Group properties, which means they're just now discovering the Eleanor Blackwell Holdings connection. How did Daniel not know about this? I wondered. Aloud. He's meticulous about due diligence. Eleanor was more meticulous, Margaret replied simply. She intentionally structured her holdings through multiple layers of private trusts, specifically to prevent Daniel from discovering the connection. It was only visible to those who knew exactly where to look. The protection my grandmother had built for me went beyond anything I could have imagined. Not just financial safeguards, but a carefully constructed network of relationships and resources I could draw upon when needed. By evening, the first concrete evidence of my unexpected advantage materialized in the form of a preliminary settlement offer from Daniel's attorney. The terms were surprisingly reasonable, generous even, with provisions for substantial child support, continued health insurance, and a lump sum payment that far exceeded what the prenuptial agreement would have allowed. He's panicking, Alexis observed when I forwarded the offer. This is not the opening position of someone who thinks he has the upper hand. Something's happened at the firm. What had happened, as I would learn the following day, was that the Carruthers Investments legal team had formally requested Daniel's removal from all matters related to their business, citing undisclosed conflicts and ethical concerns. In the space of 48 hours, Daniel had gone from rising star on the verge of partnership to a potential liability his firm couldn't afford. The unexpected advantage my grandmother had built for me wasn't just financial, it was reputational, professional, and social. All the domains where Daniel had always assumed superiority had suddenly tilted in my favor. The man who had dismissed my grandmother's trust as a pittance was now scrambling to contain the damage as that same trust systematically dismantled the career he'd prioritized above all else, above honesty, above fidelity, above his marriage, and his unborn children. 3 days after our confrontation, Daniel texted asking to meet. I agreed to coffee at a neutral location, a busy cafe downtown where the public setting would discourage any dramatic scenes. Margaret advised against meeting him at all, but I needed to see his face, to watch him squirm as he attempted to salvage what he could from the wreckage of his plans. I arrived first, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance. When Daniel walked in 10 minutes later, I barely recognized him. Gone was the impeccably groomed attorney with confident posture and calculating eyes. This Daniel looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a rumpled suit that suggested he'd been sleeping in his office. "Olivia," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded but said nothing, waiting. "I've had some time to think," he continued, his voice low and measured. "This situation has escalated in ways neither of us intended. I think we need to take a step back and consider what's best for everyone involved." "You mean what's best for you?" I corrected calmly. "Now that your partnership is in jeopardy and the Carruthers account is at risk." He flinched slightly. "That's not fair. I care about you, about our children." "Twins," I reminded him. "Twin boys. You haven't once referred to them specifically since I told you." Daniel's expression softened in that practiced way I'd seen him use in negotiations, a calculated display of vulnerability designed to elicit sympathy. "You're right," he admitted, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled back before he could touch me. "I've been overwhelmed. The pregnancy, the partnership, everything happened so quickly. I handled it badly, I know that now." "Badly?" I echoed. "You were planning to divorce me while I was pregnant with your children. You were having an affair with your paralegal. You were working on an acquisition involving my grandmother's assets without disclosing the conflict. Badly doesn't begin to cover it, Daniel." He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I made mistakes, serious ones. But people make mistakes, Olivia. Marriages go through difficult periods. We can work through this." "Why would we?" I asked simply. "Why would I ever trust you again?" "Because of our history," he urged. 8 years together. Because of our children. Because, despite everything, we built something worth saving. I studied him, recognizing the desperate calculation behind his words. This wasn't about love or family. This was about damage control. Daniel had assessed his options and determined that reconciliation was his best remaining play. "Tell me," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Did you end things with Vanessa before or after you learned about my grandmother's trust fund?" The question caught him off guard. "That's not relevant to—" "It's entirely relevant," I interrupted. "Was it before or after you discovered that divorcing me would cost you the Carruthers account and your partnership?" His silence was answer. "Enough." "That's what I thought," I said, gathering my purse. "This meeting is over." "Wait," he said, his voice sharper now. "You didn't let me finish. I've drafted a post-nuptial agreement that addresses your concerns while preserving our marriage. Generous terms for you and the children, complete financial transparency going forward, even a provision returning your name to the house deed." I almost laughed. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't a negotiation, Daniel. I'm not looking for better terms within our marriage. I'm ending it." "Be reasonable, Olivia." His tone shifted to condescension. "You're pregnant with twins. Do you really want to be a single mother? Do you think you can manage alone?" "I won't be alone," I replied. "I have resources, support, people who genuinely care about me, more than you ever expected." His expression darkened. "Like the Carruthers? That's temporary. Once this blows over, they'll remember where their real loyalties lie. Julian needs my firm more than he needs your grandmother's hotel shares." "Is that what you're telling yourself?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because Julian and Marianne are coming to dinner at my place tomorrow to discuss my role in the restructured hotel group. They seemed quite interested in my event management background." The color drained from Daniel's face. "You're bluffing." "I don't need to bluff," I said, standing to leave. "Unlike you, I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I'm simply reclaiming my life, the one you tried to take from me." He grabbed my wrist as I turned to go, his fingers digging in just tight enough to make me wince. "This isn't over, Olivia. You have no idea what you're doing. The firm's attorneys will—" "Remove your hand," I said quietly, "or I will call security and report that my estranged husband, against whom I have a temporary restraining order, is assaulting me in public." His eyes widened. "Restraining order? What are you talking about?" "The one Judge Mitchell granted yesterday," I replied. "Sandra's husband was quite sympathetic to my situation. Apparently, he's never approved of how the firm's partners treat their wives." Daniel released my wrist as if burned. "You've lost your mind. There are no grounds for a restraining order. I've never hurt you." "Emotional abuse is still abuse, Daniel. And 10 witnesses from your firm's holiday party saw you grab my arm last December when I was talking to Julian Carruthers without your supervision. Sandra has quite the memory for details." I turned to leave again, but paused, allowing myself one final moment of clarity with the man I had once loved so deeply. "You know what your biggest mistake was, Daniel? Not the affair. Not even the planned divorce. It was underestimating me. Underestimating my grandmother. Underestimating the women you thought you could control." As I walked away, I heard him call, after me, no longer the smooth, confident attorney, but a desperate man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. "Olivia, please. We can fix this. I'll do anything. Counseling, full financial disclosure, whatever you want." I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say to the man who had seen me as nothing more than a placeholder in his life, who had planned to discard me at the moment of my greatest vulnerability. The attempted reconciliation had revealed exactly what I needed to see. Not a husband who wanted to save our marriage, but a man desperately trying to save himself. The weeks following my cafe confrontation with Daniel unfolded with a swiftness that surprised even Margaret. Rather than the protracted legal battle she had anticipated, Daniel's team suddenly pushed for a quick, quiet settlement. The reason became clear when Alexis received a call from a partner at Matthews and Levine who wasn't directly involved in Daniel's case. "They're cutting him loose," Alexis reported during our strategy meeting. "Not just removing him from the Carruthers accounts. They're asking him to take a leave of absence while they review ethical concerns about his conduct." "How serious is that in law firm terms?" I asked. Margaret and Alexis exchanged knowing glances. "It's the professional equivalent of being taken out back and shot," Margaret explained bluntly. "They're building a case for dismissal while giving him the chance to resign for personal reasons if he cooperates with a clean divorce settlement." The firm's pressure, combined with the Carruthers' very public support of me, created leverage beyond anything my grandmother could have engineered. Daniel was facing not just the loss of his partnership in marriage, but potentially his entire career if the full extent of his ethical lapses became public knowledge. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 16 days after Daniel had asked for a divorce, I sat in a conference room at Margaret's firm, reviewing the final settlement agreement with Alexis. "This is considerably more favorable than most divorce settlements, especially given the prenuptial agreement," Alexis noted, highlighting key provisions. "Full medical coverage for you and the twins through birth and beyond. Child support at 200% of the statutory guidelines. A lump sum settlement that essentially ignores the prenup entirely. And of course, full ownership of the house transferred to your name." "What's he getting in return?" I asked, still suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true where Daniel was concerned. "Confidentiality," Margaret said, joining us, with a fresh pot of tea. "His firm wants absolute assurance that the specifics of his conduct, particularly the conflict of interest regarding the Carruthers acquisition, won't become public. They're essentially paying for your silence." I considered this. And if I don't want to be silent? If I want people to know what he did? Margaret sat beside me. "That's absolutely your right. But consider what you gain from this agreement versus what you gain from public exposure. The settlement provides financial security for you and your children, a clean break, and the ability to move forward without a lengthy court battle during your pregnancy. She was right, of course. As satisfying as it might be to see Daniel publicly humiliated, my priority needed to be my health and the twins' well-being. A protracted legal fight would only add stress during an already high-risk pregnancy. There's one more thing, Alexis added, turning to the final page. Daniel is waiving any custody claims beyond standard visitation rights. You'll have sole legal custody and primary physical custody of the twins. This was unexpected. Daniel had initially insisted on joint custody, positioning himself as an equally committed parent despite his actions suggesting otherwise. Why would he give up custody so easily? I asked. Because fighting for it would require court appearances, evaluations, and public scrutiny he can't afford right now, Margaret explained. His firm made it clear that a messy custody battle would violate their conditions for his dignified exit. 4 hours later, it was done. Daniel arrived with Lawrence Keller, signed the papers without meeting my eyes, and left without a word. No dramatic confrontation, no last-minute negotiations, just a silent surrender that spoke volumes about how completely the tables had turned. As the door closed behind him, Margaret squeezed my shoulder. Congratulations, Olivia. You're officially free. Free. The word resonated through me as I placed a protective hand over my growing belly. Free from Daniel's manipulation, from his control, from the constant need to measure my worth through his approval. Outside Margaret's office, rain had given way to watery sunshine, the city glistening with the particular beauty that follows a storm. I stood on the steps, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the literal and figurative weight I now carried. My phone chimed with a text from Kate, who had been receiving regular updates from across the country. Just got your message. It's done. Sending so much love to you and my nephews. Those boys have the strongest mama on the planet. As I walked to my car, another message arrived. This one from Marianne Carruthers. Julian and I are delighted to hear the resolution is complete. When you're ready, we'd love to discuss your thoughts on restructuring the Foundation's annual gala. No pressure, just keeping the door open. The formal end of my marriage hadn't brought the grief I might once have expected. Instead, I felt a calm certainty that this resolution, painful as the journey had been, was leading me exactly where I needed to go. That evening, alone in what was now truly my house, I opened my grandmother's journal again, finding an entry I'd read several times since Margaret had given me the book. I worry that Olivia will see my arrangements as interference or lack of faith in her judgment. But love isn't just supporting someone's choices. Sometimes it's creating a safety net they don't know they need. I hope she never has to use these protections. But if she does, I hope she understands they were built with love, not doubt. She has always been stronger than she knows. For the first time, I fully grasped what Eleanor had done. She hadn't just protected me financially. She had created a path back to myself, a way to reclaim my independence when I was at my most vulnerable. The formal resolution of my marriage wasn't just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of something entirely new. I fell asleep that night with my grandmother's journal beside me, and my hands resting on my stomach, where my sons grew stronger each day, blissfully unaware of how fiercely they were already loved and protected. 4 months after signing the divorce papers, I stood in what would soon be the twins' nursery, supervising the delivery of 2 matching cribs. My belly had grown enormous. Carrying twin boys at 7 months pregnant was no small feat, but I moved with a newfound confidence that had nothing to do with physical grace and everything to do with the woman I was becoming. The house had transformed, along with me. Gone were Daniel's austere design choices, the colorless walls, the uncomfortable statement furniture, the impersonal artwork selected to impress his colleagues. In their place, warm colors, comfortable seating, and photos of people I actually loved. Kate and her family, my parents in younger days, and prominently displayed on the mantel, my grandmother Eleanor in her garden, laughing at the camera with twinkling eyes that seemed to say, "I told you so." The nursery itself was a bright, cheerful space with pale yellow walls, hand-painted woodland animals, and two beautiful oak cribs that Kate had helped me select during her visit last month. My sister had flown in for 2 weeks to help me prepare for the twins' arrival, and those 14 days of sister time had healed parts of me I hadn't realized were wounded. "You seem different," Kate had observed one evening as we assembled baby furniture. "Not just because of everything that happened with Daniel. Something deeper has changed." She was right. The transformation went beyond my circumstances. I had rediscovered pieces of myself that had been systematically suppressed during my marriage. My decisiveness, my creative eye, my social connections independent of Daniel's approval. The most significant change had come 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when Marianne Carruthers' casual offer of consulting work evolved into something more concrete. A part-time position as events director for the Carruthers Foundation, with flexible hours and the ability to work primarily from home after the twins were born. "We've needed someone with your expertise for years," Marianne had said when I expressed concern about managing work with newborn twins. "We can wait for you to establish a routine with the babies. The position will still be here." This vote of confidence from a woman whose opinion Daniel had taught me to value above almost anyone else's was transformative. After years of being told my career was secondary, my professional skills a hobby rather than a vocation, someone was not only recognizing my value, but willing to accommodate my new life as a mother. I had accepted the position and immediately began part-time work on restructuring their annual fundraising gala. The creative fulfillment of using my professional skills again, combined with the flexibility to prepare for motherhood on my own terms, had awakened something in me that Daniel had nearly extinguished, a sense of possibility. As the delivery men positioned the second crib precisely where I indicated, my phone rang. Margaret Blackwell, calling with her weekly update. "Good news," she said without preamble. "The final transfer of the Meridian Hotel Group shares is complete. You are now officially the majority stakeholder, with Carruthers Investments as your primary partner." "Has Daniel been informed?" I asked, signing the delivery receipt and thanking the workers as they left. "His attorneys received notification this morning." I suspect he already knew it was coming, but the official documentation makes it, well, official. After we hung up, I wandered through my transformed home, one hand supporting my back, the other resting on my rounded belly where my sons occasionally kicked, as if reminding me they were part of this journey too. In the study, once, Daniel's domain, now my workspace for foundation projects, I paused before the framed quote I'd hung above the desk. Words from my grandmother's journal that had become something of a mantra. "The strongest women are not those who never fall, but those who rise with greater power after the fall." My transformation was still ongoing, an evolution rather than a sudden change. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the insecurity Daniel had cultivated in me for years. But those moments grew fewer as days passed, replaced by a steady certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, becoming exactly who I was meant to be. The twins' nursery, my redesigned home, my renewed career, my reclaimed financial independence. These were not just changes to my circumstances, but reflections of my internal transformation from Daniel's appropriate wife to my own person. A person my grandmother had seen clearly even when I couldn't see myself. As I made my way slowly back downstairs, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror, rounded with new life, eyes bright with purpose, standing tall, despite the literal weight I carried. The woman looking back at me wasn't just surviving her husband's betrayal, she was thriving because of it. 2 weeks before my due date, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat on my patio reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The twins were active today, their movements strong and reassuring. Dr. Winters had scheduled a C-section for the following week, concerned about the positioning of twin B, but had assured me both boys were healthy and developing perfectly. I absently traced patterns on my belly, following the push of tiny feet and elbows. I thought about the lessons I'd learned, not just about Daniel or marriage, but about myself and the nature of resilience. When Daniel first asked for a divorce, while I was pregnant, I'd felt utterly betrayed, completely vulnerable. I couldn't imagine surviving, let alone thriving. Yet here I was, preparing to welcome my sons into a home filled with love and stability, supported by a community I had rebuilt, financially secure in ways I never would have been had I remained in my marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. By attempting to discard me at my most vulnerable moment, Daniel had inadvertently set me free. His betrayal had activated not just my grandmother's financial protections, but something deeper within myself. A strength I might never have discovered had our marriage continued in its comfortable patterns of control and concession. There's a particular wisdom that comes from surviving what you thought would destroy you. A clarity about what truly matters, what you're truly capable of. Before Daniel's betrayal, I had defined myself primarily through his perception. My worth had been measured by his approval, my success by how well I fulfilled his expectations. Now I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me years earlier. True strength doesn't come from external validation, but from inner certainty. The ability to stand alone, if necessary, secure in your own value. Eleanor had built her life on this principle, creating success on her own terms despite the constraints of her era. She had tried to instill this wisdom in me, and when words failed, she had created elaborate protections to give me a second chance at learning it for myself. I opened her journal to a page I had marked, an entry from shortly before her diagnosis. Watched. Olivia with Daniel at the charity dinner tonight. She's so eager for his approval, so careful not to disagree or draw attention. It pains me to see how she diminishes herself to fit his vision of the perfect wife. She was never like this before. Him, always confident, opinionated, full of life. When does adjustment become erasure? When does compromise become surrender? I fear she's losing herself piece by piece, and he's collecting each fragment as if it's his due. Reading these words now, I recognized the truth in them. But I also recognized something my grandmother couldn't have known, that sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely before we can discover who we truly are. The wisdom I had gained through this painful journey wasn't just about Daniel's betrayal or my grandmother's foresight. It was about the universal experience of falling and rising, of losing and finding, of breaking and healing stronger at the broken places. If I could share anything with others facing similar betrayals, it would be this. What feels like an ending? Maybe the beginning of something far more authentic. What seems like abandonment may be liberation in disguise. The person who attempts to discard you may unknowingly be opening the door to your true self. This doesn't minimize the pain or excuse the betrayal. Nothing justifies what Daniel did. The infidelity, the calculated timing of his abandonment, the years of subtle control that preceded it. But understanding that his actions reflected his weaknesses rather than my worth had been transformative. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden my grandmother had loved, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for Daniel's betrayal, but for the wisdom it had ultimately revealed. The understanding that we are always stronger than we know, more capable than we believe, more resilient than our fears suggest. When my sons asked someday about their father, about why we weren't a traditional family, I would tell them a story not centered on betrayal, but on discovery. Not about what was lost, but what was found. I would tell them about their great-grandmother Eleanor, who had seen clearly what others missed, who had planned meticulously for a future she wouldn't live to see, who had embedded in legal documents, and financial structures a profound message of love and faith in her granddaughter's strength. And most importantly, I would teach them the wisdom that had come at such cost, that our value is inherent, not bestowed by others, that the people who truly love us want us to shine, not shrink, that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.